And Kevin Hanrahan, tell us about him. What kind of man was he?
Well, I can tell you that Kevin was known as an enforcer. He was, he could be seen in any organized crime factions. Any given day, you could see him with a different faction. He was able to move around the organized crime circles in New England. He was friendly with people from Boston that were mob associates in Boston and in Rhode Island. You could see him on any given day with Richie Gomes, a major player in Rhode Island back then, with Bobby Almonte, with Baby Shanks Monacchio, Willie Monacchio, with Chippy Scavola. So we would have surveillances with Kevin, with these players, and it was our job to figure out the different factions and how he fit into that. But he was known to be an enforcer. When I was assigned to the intelligence unit in 1986, Kevin was a major player in organized crime by that time. And whenever Kevin showed up at a bar late at night or whatnot, he brought fear into whatever location he showed up in. But he was a debonair dresser. He was a gentleman when he walked into these places. So he was an interesting guy because feared on the street, but could be a gentleman to law enforcement.
You've met him, obviously. Would you consider him an intimidating figure?
Well, it depends on what forum you're in. For Kevin and Richie Gomes and Bobby Almonte to walk into a nightclub, that would be intimidating for the nightclub scene, the management or whatnot. And they were known to be involved in extortions and beatings, and it wasn't intimidating to law enforcement, that's for sure.
When you were talking about seeing him with different players in LCN, was this where he would start appearing as you were monitoring one person or another person, he'd start to show up? Or did the State Police Intelligence Unit begin to follow, did they begin to follow Kevin Hanrahan, and why?
I would say in the in the mid-'80s, we started to put a lot of concentrate on Kevin and his organization, his associates, because he had such a wide variety of friends in organized crime. He was able to touch upon many different factions. He first came up in the Gerard Wilmette faction, and then we saw him as a close associate of Richie Gomes, who had a propensity to a reputation for violence. So there came a point in time when we were working cases on Kevin Hanrahan and trying to incarcerate him, and which we did.
You talked about him being involved with different factions. Would you consider him a loyal guy, or was he someone who constantly looked out for number one?
Well, again, he had these close associates, and he was loyal to his criminal associates. But his contact list spread from Boston into Connecticut and maybe further. I mean, I've had him on surveillances with Timothy Mello from Fall River, with Bobby Almonte, Baby Shanks Monacchio, Chippy Scavola, Gerard Wilmette. It just goes back. It's a laundry list of organized crime associates.
Well, you talked about a lot of his friends. Did he have a lot of enemies as well?
Well, I would say that when Kevin was shot and killed, that there certainly were quite a few suspects. There was reason to remove him for organized crime figures. But we have our own theories as to how that happened.
What were those theories?
Nothing I'm going to share at this time.
When you heard that he was gunned down, were you surprised?
No.
Why?
Because when you live that lifestyle, when you work in the streets like that, sometimes you live by the sword, you die by the sword.
Yet it was important to solve the crime. In reading through the materials at the time, it seemed to me that law enforcement had a real good feel as to who committed it, as far as who pulled the trigger. Why do you think there have been no arrests?
Well, I can tell you we ran into some obstacles in the investigation. Providence Police and the State Police did, and You know, I can't speak to specifics as to where the investigation ended up, but I can tell you that those are always open cases, and we're always willing to pursue those further when more information is received. But it was important for us to solve that, and, because he has a family, and he has, aside from his propensity to be involved in criminal and violent acts, he has a family, and it was important for us to try at that time to solve it. And also, when we have an organized crime hit, we know that there's an organized crime member, a violent person who has perpetrated that, and it's behoove us to get that person off the street. So that's where we come from a law enforcement perspective.
What's your recollection of the homicide at the time? He was at the Arch restaurant, and he walks outside. Do you remember what happened that night?
I know he was summoned outside to engage in conversation with someone, and he was shot and killed right on the corner on Atwells Avenue.
Do you think there were witnesses?
Yes.
Did any of those witnesses come forward?
No.
Why do you think that was?
It's not for me to guess why they didn't.
If they're still out there today, do you think they'd be more apt to come forward?
I don't know.
Would it have helped if they had come forward?
It would have helped.
Yeah. Do you know if law enforcement was able to make contact with any of these witnesses at the time, and they just didn't want to help out?
Yes, we were able to contact some of the witnesses, and they were not forthcoming.
What does that tell you about the aura of fear from these guys?
It certainly speaks to their violent reputation.
Would you like to see this crime solved?
Yes.